Welcome to FO Live, brought to you by Fair Observer, a platform for citizen journalists with over 2,500 contributors from 90 different countries. And we would love you to join the conversation. So please do sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to our channel, follow us on social media, and you can also publish with us. Today's discussion is Make in India, which is Prime Minister Narendra Modi's flagship policy since coming to power. The question is it working or is it hampered by red tape and cheaper foreign imports? So let me just introduce you all again. We have Mudit Jain, who's the Managing Director of DCW Limited, an Indian-based chemicals company. Sunil Asnani, who's the founder and managing partner at First Principles based in San Francisco. Arti, who's an investment professional at Rare Enterprises based in Mumbai. And Tully, who's the director of Sahgal Tully Partners, based here in London, but who grew up and worked in India. So again, if we can go to Sunil, we'll just try and ask you just to define what that policy of Make in India really means.
Sure. So this Make in India is basically trying to create jobs through manufacturing. And why manufacturing? Because economists say that, you can have a bigger multiplier effect. There are more direct and indirect jobs if you focus on manufacturing instead of other areas such as services. So that is the reason why they focus on manufacturing. And a lot of countries have gotten out of poverty and moved to middle class or mid-income level by focusing on manufacturing. Now, so that was a core idea. And within manufacturing, there were three things that we were focusing on, three goals. One is to increase the growth of manufacturing sector from mid-single digits to 12 to 14% annually. The second goal was to increase the contribution of manufacturing from 16 or 15% of GDP to 25% of GDP. And finally, they wanted to create 100 million jobs by 2022, starting in 2014. So these were the three main cornerstones of Make in India policy.
And in your opinion, just very quickly, Sunil, is this something that's worked so far?
Well, I would say that the policy was very ambitious to begin with. I mean, there are total labor force in India is like 400 million or so, and you expect that 100 million jobs will be created in a matter of 5 to 7 years. I thought it was very ambitious, and at the same time, I mean, if you just go by their own self-stated goals, and I would say that policy has failed. But I wouldn't say that the initiative is wrong. It's just that the stated objectives have not been achieved so far. For example, if you look at the growth of manufacturing during this period, it was like 6 to 7% versus 12 to 14% projected. And if you look at the contribution of manufacturing in GDP, it has actually gone down from 16% to I think it's about 15 or 14 now. So, and if you look at the number of jobs created, India doesn't even measure the impact of, conveniently they don't even measure the impact of this policy on jobs. In fact, in the parliament, somebody asked this question, how many jobs have been created? Then the government responded that we don't even measure the impact.
So, then butt in perhaps with Mudit, because you're clearly there on the ground, you run a successful chemicals company. What's your experience on the ground? Have you felt any impact of this policy?
Who's Make in India addressed to? I only know India. My operations are in India, even though I have imports and exports. So I will continue to make in India. We have invested nearly $150 million from 2005 to 2015. So I don't know what Make in India is just a nice slogan, and I would love to make in India. Sadly, just to give an example, we manufacture PVC resin where the demand is 3 million tons pre-COVID. I'm talking pre-COVID figures, and India makes about 1.5 million tons, and 1.5 million tons is imported. Sadly, no exporter into India is putting a plant in India, and no Indian is expanding its capacity despite there being such a huge demand, because industry subsidizes government because it pays higher tariffs for power, interest, energy, oil, and infrastructure costs. So I'm always going to make in India because that's all I know. But who's it addressed to is the central question.
Okay, Arti, maybe we can come to you and just your experience as an investment professional who's moved to India after having studied in the US. What motivated you to come back? Is it anything to do with this policy, or is it in spite of this policy? You might just have to unmute yourself there, Arti.
Sorry about that. I was saying, let me start off by saying where you live is a very personal choice, right? Ultimately. So for me, the plan was always to straddle the East and the West. I'm a proud Indian. I'm deeply patriotic. I'm a quintessential Bombay, or as they now call it, Mumbai girl. And, I love our traditions, our diversity, our chaos. And as an only child, I have very strong family roots and ties in India, like Mudit does. And then second, what was going on in America with Trump's election victory, Hillary's loss, had a huge personal impact on me in late 16 and early 2017. I was very disillusioned. I always thought that I'd probably be more involved in India at a much later stage in my career. But when the so-called American values weren't upheld, I didn't feel a strong pull to continue staying there. To your question about, was it Modi's Make in India policy? I mean, undeniably, under the Modi government, back in 16, there was a lot of action and innovation happening. And it continues to be an exciting time to be here and participate in the Indian growth story. Like we all know, we are one of the most populous countries in the world. But on the supply side, we have a strong entrepreneurial spirit. We have a very skilled manpower. And on the demand side, we have a large domestic captive market. So to me as an investor, it has all the elements for great value creation for new businesses if it's built with strong unit economics. So both, coupled with the personal, coupled what was happening which was home for me for more than a decade, America, and what was happening in India under Modi, it seemed like the right time to move.
Okay. Now, Sam, if we can come to you. To give a bit of a global perspective, has this Make in India policy made the Indian market any more appealing to foreign investors like yourself?
Firstly, I would say I've covered the Indian market since '93 when the reforms first started, basically. And I've seen Indian industry even before that, how it struggled in what they call the license Raj. And the change from then to now has been absolutely enormous. So Make in India is a relatively recent part of this phenomenon. I would also say, if you look at India, there are many very, very highly successful manufacturing success stories. I think of names like Maruti, like Motherson, like the Tata Group, and in sectors like pharma. And there's also handicrafts and many traditional industries as well, some of which are not doing so well, plus now the industries of the future. So I sort of see Make in India as, for all the reasons that Sunil and the other panelists have spoken about, a lot of sort of rationale behind it. But really, is it addressing the significant things that have been making in India more difficult than it needs to be? Because the potential in India is enormous, but it's never quite reached that potential. And
just to stay with you, Sam, just briefly, I know it's a very big question, but why hasn't it reached that potential?
Well, I think there are a lot of reasons. The main thing, I think, is if you look at manufacturing, I would say that there are 4 or 5 different elements that need to work properly for it to succeed. You've got capital, technology, skills, infrastructure, and then supportive government and laws. Now, on all of those areas, India's had certain problems in the past. Some of them have been more addressed than others, but I think there's still a fundamental lack that means that you see countries like Vietnam, Bangladesh, even right next to India, able to attract manufacturing, particularly international manufacturing investment, much more readily than India has done.
Mudit, if we can come to you, what's your experience with that, with manufacturing going to neighboring countries rather than India?
So sadly now, when China has had this pandemic, India could have drawn a lot of investment, because relatively India is a big market size and per capita consumptions are very much lesser than compared to its Southeast Asian neighbors. But as Sam was just saying, for reasons of bureaucracy, and not a clear policy, people are not coming to India. People like me will not go anywhere else. We will only make in India because I live here. But we want, and I welcome foreign competition to come to India. Now you have to ask them why they are not coming here. Frankly, our Honorable Prime Minister has said the Lord Ganesha, whom we worship in India, and even incense sticks are imported from China. This is ridiculous. We should be making in India. But because as I said earlier, Indian industry subsidizes government by higher taxes, higher costs, whereas in China is the opposite. So that's the crux of the issue, is India is not competitive.
And how is India ever going to compete with a giant like China? I mean, is it an unrealistic expectation?
So you see, we are competing on digital India or the software side. I would say back offices or the IT sector, India is very competitive, but not in manufacturing, because the major input costs of manufacturing, that is power, oil, interest, infrastructure. In fact, just to illustrate, the freight cost from China to South India is about 4,000 rupees a ton. I'm talking rupees. From South India to North India, 6,500 rupees. It's all because of higher taxes on petrol and diesel. So you cannot compete. Simple.
Arti, does this make you feel despondent when you hear someone like Mudit talking like that, or do you still have an element of hope?
No, I think I look at it as the glass half full. I agree with what Sam and Mudit said, that, we missed the bus on textiles. Bangladesh and the Southeast Asian countries definitely won out there. But, I think the future of the Indian economy is very bright in general. Apart from manufacturing, there's been a lot of rural reform and agrarian reform that the government has passed during lockdown. And 70% of our population is in rural India, of which over 40% of India engages in agricultural activities. And having free market reform and free market pricing and fully integrated supply chains in agriculture is going to transform the way this economy functions. Second, specifically to manufacturing, what I would like to say is, Mudit referred to this, we're very good with IT services. The two manufacturing industries we've done really well on are automotive and pharma. Back in 1998, we hardly ever exported any automobiles. And now we are the hub of making medicine for almost all of America. That's one of the big election talking points right now in the US election.
I think Mudit wants to come back on that point. Mudit?
Yeah, Arti is absolutely right. I'll talk about automobiles. Why that has become so successful? Because they're very high import duty of 60%, whereas for other industrial goods, it's 7.5% max. So this has forced companies to come to India, and also the pension costs in the West are very high compared to India. But now recently, you see General Motors have packed up, and Ford, which split from Mahindra, have now told Mahindra, you associate with us or take it over. To come to pharma, yes, India was very competitive, and now there's been a spate of takeovers by the foreign pharma companies into India, because the TRIPS, I'm not very familiar with it, but the, those intellectual IPRs have expired. So there is a lot of potential. I feel so sad with a country of the size of India. We should be, a $10 trillion economy like China, but we are, I don't know, maybe 1 trillion.
So, Arti, you want to come back and finish your answer?
Yeah, so, Sunil mentioned this too, right? When the initiative started, it had extremely lofty goals. So if you compare it to that, of course, it's a failure, right? But let's look at an anecdotal example with IKEA, right? IKEA, we all know IKEA as a huge international brand. IKEA manufactures 20% of what it sells in India domestically and plans to wrap up to 30%. IKEA has been exporting from India for over 30 years, and building up local supply chains will enable it to expand exports from India in the coming years, right? That impetus is provided by the policy. What I agree with Mudit is, of course, we've not achieved our potential, but like I said in the beginning, I want to look at it as the glass half full. It doesn't mean we won't be able to. Like, for instance, right? Like, I think, of course, like with everything going on with the pandemic in China, other countries are looking for alternatives. The other reforms, I spoke about rural reform. India has also passed significant labor and land reforms during lockdown. This is going to unlock a lot of value. We are actually, although a lot of FDI has come in, the economy has not kept pace and businesses have not grown in manufacturing because of this gridlock. right? Now, if land, labor, reform, and infrastructure becomes better, and we know that there is talk of production linking schemes and incentive schemes coming in, I don't know, why we wouldn't do well. We have proven excellence in automotives and pharma. So my point of view, I would leave, Make in India with this saying that mainly industries where innovation is important, R&D is important, compliance is important. These have the potential to shift to India and in the next few years do well. We know defense is a stated goal of the government. Defense.
Sorry, just to come back to Sunil now, maybe I can ask you, should this policy perhaps have been renamed? Is the problem that it's focused a bit too much on manufacturing when, as Arti just mentioned, there are other sectors perhaps that are doing better now?
No, I would say that the other sector, things are happening naturally. For example, in technology, investment have been happening, and pharma, it has been happening naturally. You don't need a separate push on that. And those things actually, if you see, they don't create as many jobs, right? So that is a problem. So we want to create more jobs so that the fruits of economic wealth are distributed more evenly, and and that will lead to more volume growth, and that is what will be good holistically speaking. You'll be able to grow without causing income inequality. So which is why manufacturing focus is important. But I would say that we should keep trying and not worry that that we have not been able to achieve our goals. I think a lot of good things have happened, and we just need to keep pushing and keep doing.
And as an investor based in the US, clearly, have you noticed that, for example, COVID-19 has had a big impact on investors' confidence there in India?
Well, so there are two kinds of investments. One is the foreign portfolio investment, which is investment in stocks. And then you have the foreign direct investment, which is where you have to be actually involved in running the operations in India. I would say that foreign portfolio investments saw a dip, and so did foreign direct investment during COVID times, and both have rebounded actually. In fact, the foreign direct investment between April to June has been higher by 18% compared to the previous April to June of 2019. And it has been led by investments in technology, for example, educational technology platforms, for example. So I think I'm not worried about, the investment going to India. I think the problem is more whether we are able to use that investment in delivering job growth. It is going in jobless growth. That is my biggest worry.
Okay, Sam, perhaps I can get your perspective on that. Does that worry you, or is it something that's almost, not essential to your core business, that it's not creating jobs?
No, I think that is a big worry for India overall as an economy. And it's obviously probably the single biggest challenge, as we're even seeing, for example, in the Bihar election that is taking place at the moment. Jobs and the lack of them is a major issue. But I would just briefly also like to touch on the fact that, what Sunil has said about the market is absolutely right, that in spite of this pandemic, you've actually seen substantial inflows coming in of both FDI and FPI. And the main thing that is underpinning that, which is India's biggest advantage, is it's still perceived to be such a huge potential market. Not just potential market, it is an actual market. It is a consumer market in which a manufacturer can have a huge domestic base, but also potentially use it as a base for export. And I think the reforms that Arti mentioned on land, on labor, on agriculture, those are also very positive steps forward. So I think we have to say that as an investor, it's one of the reasons why Indian stocks are relatively expensive, certainly in the global emerging market context, because there is a huge demand for them and there are a lot of very good companies.
Arti, yes, you'd like to come back on that.
Sunil and Sam both mentioned during COVID, right? Like India has seen large FDI and the market is, at least the stock markets are booming. And everyone argues, the stock markets are not, a reflection of the economy. They're not a reflection of the present economy. They're a reflection of what the economy is going to be. And, to the point of utilization of FDI or just funds in general, my view on COVID is that I actually think COVID has given Make in India a shot in the arm. More demand for local manufacturing during supply chain disruptions early on in lockdown. gave impetus for domestic businesses to expand and make more in confidence that, they could compete on quality and product design. And, we were able to quickly start manufacturing necessities just as mass at scale. The textile industry, the large, clothing industry that exists, the textile ministry and domestic capital came together to find creative local solutions. So if India can continue this COVID time alignment, right, of policy, industry and capital, which has been missing for a long time in a post-COVID world, I think Make in India will eventually meet its objectives, right? If we show that we are not a socialist government or a populist government, but actually a government which believes in business creating jobs and, kicking off a virtuous cycle, why won't it happen?
Mudit, maybe you've got an answer on that. So is it going to happen?
See, well, there'll always be growth. People like me will always invest because I live in India. And there are some other companies which are also going to be in India, so they'll invest. But the point is, who is else coming into India? I welcome foreign competition, I'm saying. I don't welcome people just exporting into India. And I've given the example of PVC resin. Why aren't they putting up plants? That question should be asked to them. And as an Indian manufacturer, why aren't we expanding? It's because the delta between the import duty and the higher cost of manufacturing, it doesn't make sense. So again, I put it back, and I won't name any Indian companies. Many Indian companies have gone overseas and established plants, and then are importing that product back into India because the market is relatively bigger compared to other countries. So why aren't they making in India in the first place? Why have they gone overseas? They have done the right strategy for their own company. But what about India? India has lost out on jobs. And if you ask me, the single most, and I've been creating jobs. We have nearly 4,000 people direct and indirectly employed, and others have much more. So the question is, ask and you'll find the answers are not to seek. Money is always will find itself where you get higher returns. That's why stock markets, money is flowing in the stock markets because they feel Indian markets are not that efficient compared to American or Japanese or wherever. So they'll flow here. As simple as that. Money is always available.
Sunil, we've got a question from one of our viewers for you, which is, in your view, what are the most promising sectors in the coming decades for India?
So I'm talking from the perspective of an investor into stock market. Okay, so my view may be very different from the person who is actually coming as an FDI. From my perspective, I want to invest in businesses where there is minimal interference from macroeconomic challenges, and where the management is actually able to drive the company. And where the growth potential is also enormous. So in my opinion, as a stock market investor, investment in certain private sector banks, in the financial sector, investment in certain well-run consumer technology and healthcare companies. I think these are the areas where there is lack of penetration, and there are many good entrepreneurs. And so you can have a long-term compounded productive growth possibilities. So in my opinion, those are the promising sectors for people like us.
Okay, Sunil, thank you. I think we've got Atul Singh, who's going to be joining us. I'm hoping he's going to be joining us. Here he is, Atul. You have a question for Sam and for Arti, I believe.
For Mudit as well. Sam and Arti, do you think Indian stock markets are overrated? And for Mudit, do you think Indian industry needs the rest of Indian industry needs the same protectionism that the auto sector enjoys? Thank you.
So I think the first one was for Arti and Sam. So perhaps we can go to you first, Arti.
I think, saying that the Indian stock market is overrated, who decides that, right? Like, what is your opportunity cost of investing in a world where interest rates are like 1% or 0% worldwide, right? So I think that's a very complicated macro question, which has many layers and cannot be answered very simplistically. Sorry, I'm having a dyslexic moment. But what I do want to reflect on is that I don't believe India needs the same protectionism that China offers to its companies, right? Like one of the things that makes India attractive and more attractive than China is that we are a democratic country. We have freedom of speech. We have freedom of religion. That is why a lot of companies choose to align with us and are more comfortable with us. And not only that, a lot of global labor is like finding it easier to sink in with Indian business, Indian corporate culture. So I don't think the answer is to become more closed and protectionist. The world is moving in the other way, right? The world, like the global pandemic, has shrunk. It's flattening the world, and merger globalization with cloud servers and internets like makes it easy for Indians who are skilled in technology in English to almost have their cake and eat it too. I would argue that our auto industry didn't thrive because of protectionism. Our pharma industry, which is manufacturing, did not thrive because of protectionism. It thrived because of talent. It thrived because we respect IT, which China doesn't. It thrived because we know how to do R&D and compliance better than China, and we have to play to our strengths. One of our strengths is we are democratic. We can't turn that around and say, oh, we have to start becoming a protectionist economy.
Okay, Sam, if we can come to you next. Again, Atul's question, are Indian stock markets overrated?
Yeah, very briefly in terms of dealing with that. I think overrated means what in terms of are they overvalued? I think certainly if you look at a PE multiple relative to a lot of other markets, particularly other emerging markets, they do look quite expensive, but then you are paying for the growth, you're paying for the market. And going back to Sunil's point, you're also paying in some cases, like some of the banks he was mentioning, like some of the IT companies, the pharma companies, for very good companies who execute well. But I think you have to be very selective. And if you look at the market recently, the main driver as a proportion of the overall market has been reliance, which has attracted a huge level of FDI into its various platforms, and has seen the stock, which is the biggest market cap company in India, more than double from long-standing levels of before. So the question requires, as Arti quite rightly says, a lot of levels to answer it properly.
And Mudit, if we can come to you next about this question about protectionism.
So, yeah, I got it. So frankly, I don't want protection. I want a level playing field. What input costs are there in other countries, I want them to be in India. But sadly, as I said, the government, subsidizes its other health, education, and its own expenses and other softer areas from industry. So we are overcharged. So we cannot compete. And if they reduce their input costs, then we don't need protection. Having said that, I don't think they're going to do that. So actually, yes, industry will thrive only if there's more higher import duties. And companies which are exporting into India will then be forced to either put a plant in India or not, or vacate that market. There's a $200 billion trade deficit in India, $200 billion year on year. And that's not getting bridged.
So sticking with you perhaps, Mudit, do you have any potential solutions for the government there?
See, I have advocated this many a time, like Japan had MITI, M-I-T-I, after World War II, where government and business sat together by the Emperor Hirohito, and they made Japan a world-class nation, first in automobiles and electronics. So that's what we require in India. In Oxbridge, you teach a course in PPE, philosophy, politics, and economy. We know that the government is, at the top of the food chain. So they should invite business, sit with them and say, what are your problems? We are in the same kind of, wanting to develop India. How many taxes I'm paying, how many people we are employing, and we are just a small microcosm. Even if, we pay 20% taxes on our turnover, which is a huge amount. So if they sit down, it's all a question of aligning interests and sitting down and solving problems together.
So just again, staying with you, Mudit, because you have such interesting perspectives from being there on the ground. And clearly the government has prioritized manufacturing. Did it do so without even speaking to manufacturers?
You see, again, I said this, make in India, what does it mean? Who's it addressed to? I'm always making in India. So what is the priority? It's according to manufacturing. I think they've given, I have to say this very painfully, they've given stepmotherly treatment to manufacturing. Because prior to 1990, when India liberalized, import duties were very high. And then thereafter, the import duties got crashed down because of IMF and other, so that we could get foreign loans. And the other input costs, like furnace oil supplied by the Indian oil companies, was 5,000 rupees a ton in 1990. It went up to 35,000 rupees a ton in about 2 years ago. So on one hand, import duties went down, and input costs supplied by, again, Government of India companies went, off top of the roof. So Indian manufacturers were kind of sandwiched. I'll give you one example. Examples are more kind of, hitting the point. In 1996, we started importing calcium carbide from China. With a 40% import duty, the Chinese calcium carbide was about 4,000 rupees ton cheaper than from an Indian manufacturer, only because the power cost in India was 5 times, and maybe China was subsidizing its manufacturers. There were 3 manufacturers in the south, all closed down by 2002. So Indian industry closed down, and Bob's your uncle. So I feel very painful. And the capacities also in India in manufacturing are minuscule. For example, in caustic soda, which I am in, our capacity is about 4 million tons and below. In China, it's 40 million tons. In PVC, Indian capacities are 1.5 million tons. In China, it's 20 million tons. Maybe China doesn't produce 20 million tons. It produces about 15, 16 million tons. So Indian capacities are 10% of China, and India is a big country. We have got such a great growth potential. India can be the next driver of growth in the world, if only we allow the animal energies to be unleashed, not only by Indian entrepreneurs, but any entrepreneur who comes to India and produces on Indian soil.
Well, Mudit, you certainly have a lot of that energy. Sunil, if we can come to you from that kind of global perspective, we've got about 10 minutes just to wrap up the discussion. So we have actually got a question from someone watching, which I think is pretty much directed at you. Excuse me for just reading it, but the question is, does the Indian stock market have the same depth as in Western markets? I'm not totally sure what that means. Is that something that you understand the question of, or shall I try and?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think what the question refers to is the liquidity, per stock. And you're right. I mean, India is pretty broad market. I mean, there are like 5,000 stocks listed in India, more than any other stock exchange in Asia. But in terms of depth, means if you want to buy a stock price without moving the stock market much, it is not that high beyond the top, 50, 60 stocks. So yeah, I mean, India can become more liquid, but I think that is not the main problem. I think stock market is just is a barometer. It's not really the main problem. I mean, for India, maybe it's a problem for investors like us. But I would say that as all of my colleagues pointed out, that India I think India does need to protect its industries to it's like simple. I will give a metaphor of a child. You cannot ask a 2-year-old child to compete in the job market. If till 15, 16 years old, you want to invest in the child and make sure the child is on his own feet before you can start competing. So same thing applies to protectionism. Protectionism, people hate protectionism, but unless you do that, you cannot increase the industry to a threshold level where it can compete. Now, today, everybody is saying that China has all those capacities and all. Would China be able to do that without any protectionism? I don't think so. I mean, I would say China has really single-handedly, protected its industry. And today they are probably 3 to 4 times more productive. The people there, the factories there are 4 to 5 times more productive than Indian factories. So why is that? Even though the wages are lower in India, despite that, the manufacturing share to GDP ratio in China has not dropped, despite all the noise that we see, right? So I think we need to protect India, especially in industries where we think where India has a natural advantage. We should do that, and over time, it will deliver. And of course, we need to invest in productivity, social and physical infrastructure. A big problem why we have not been able to take advantage of this investment in delivering growth is because our people are not productive enough, right? So we need to invest in people. We need to invest in healthcare, education. And now Mudit is complaining that, they are subsidizing healthcare and education. But the real problem is that India doesn't collect enough taxes. So that's why it is forced to tax the people it can tax. So which is why telecom is the most squeezed, industry in India. Similarly, other industries like Mudit, they are paying unnecessary taxes because we don't pay income tax. 3% of the population in India, they file taxes, but only 1% of the people pay income tax in India. I know India is poor, but I'm sure at least 15% can pay tax, right? So and our indirect taxes are not that bad, and where we have made some reforms. But direct taxation is, I think, there's a core issue. Collect taxes and make sure that you don't force the industry to subsidize social and physical infrastructure, and that's how you will be able to invest in this productivity cycle. And so, sorry, it's a long answer to the question you said, but I thought it was important to address all the questions.
Okay, thank you. Sam, if we can go to you again, we've got someone who's just emailed us a question, which is that, is India's growth story a certain outcome? Isn't it just going to happen one way or another despite these challenges?
Yes, I think it absolutely is. I think it's India has. I'll just give you one example of this. That if you look at the IT sector, which is probably one of the most successful in India, it was successful because it happened away from the government. It actually happened on the quiet. Companies were able to bypass the lack of problem with infrastructure. They set up their own infrastructure. And actually, the downturn in the IT sector in the early 2000s almost corresponded directly with the time that the Indian government set up a Ministry of Information Technology. So as soon as the government got involved, you saw the industry facing a problem. And that's why I think, it just goes back to the point that Indians have succeeded, and Indian companies like Mudit's have succeeded in spite of all these problems. Imagine what you can do if you actually lift a lot of these problems. That's what happened in the 90s, and you saw the success since then. And I think these recent reforms might be the precursor to another round of that.
Right. Arti, do you think that the government actually hinders more than it helps when it comes to manufacturing?
Look, of course, there are multiple challenges to doing business in India, right? I think if the government had to focus, this would be my top 3 that I want the government to solve on the ground, right? The first is laws keep changing. Seeking redressal in court of law can be a very lengthy affair. We know the Vodafone HDR case has been going on for 10 plus years. Apart from judiciary, red tape and bureaucracy is another huge challenge. Time and energy you expend in non-productive work is a big negative and put off. For all of the shouting and crying that Mudit was doing on taxes, I would like to point out that the government has said if you put up any new manufacturing domestic capacity from October 1st, 2019, you are going to be charged only 15% tax, right? So the tax incentives they are trying to put in place. But what is stopping it? Although we have improved ease of doing business, we've jumped numbers in the ease of doing business index, time taken for approval or the number of forms you have to fill out or license required to start a new business are still quite onerous. So I'd like the government to streamline that, right? Bureaucracy and red tape has to be cut. Third, I would say as an investor and as a business owner or business operator in such a global world, the INR foreign exchange fluctuations are way higher in countries such as China or UAE, EU, right? And now in this market where liquidities are flush, everyone is wondering Bitcoin or gold, blah, blah, blah. In my opinion, that's one of the biggest things business owners are, constantly wondering what to do. So anything the government can do fiscally to give more confidence in currency would also provide huge impetus to doing business.
Okay, Mudit, I think we've got time for you for the final word.
So, I just want to say indirect taxes. Petrol prices crashed during the pandemic. In India, they went up. The tax on petrol, indirect tax, is 250%. Income tax comes after you generate income. If they have reduced that, I'm not interested in that. Even the common man is paying so much taxes on petrol. And like that, there are many, this GST, many taxes are outside, many commodities are outside the ambit of GST. So it's the indirect tax which is hurting everyone. and the taxes are very high. Income tax comes later. Tax the farmers. These will not help me. Cash flow runs a business, not these cosmetic changes. I welcome foreign competition. Why don't you move your headquarters to India, Claire? If India is such a 1 billion market and there's such a great leadership, it's not, Indian, in fact, are going overseas and they are calling them Indian origin CEOs. They are not Indian. Sundar Pichai, then whatever, who's there, Satya Nadella, and so many others. They are American citizens. They may have been born in India, but they've been made in America.
Excellent.
I say it painfully.
Well, sadly, yeah. Well, maybe we should all move there, as Mudit says, and then we'd resolve this problem once and for all. I think we're going to probably have to wrap it up. Arti, you have your hand raised. Do you want one last word?
Well, I just want to, to Mudit's point of, they're not Indian, they're American. There are enough people in the recent few years who moved back to India to start entrepreneurial and tech businesses. Those opportunities are a flush. E-commerce, logistics, SaaS has created billionaires and crorepati's, success stories, Flipkart, Prestige, Swiggy. So our diaspora is coming back home to pursue entrepreneurial ambitions. I think the only thing I'd like to leave, everyone to think about is, I understand everything we talk about, manufacturing, India, like job growth, GDP per capita, blah, blah, blah. But what I want to leave everyone with is, like Sunil said in one phrase, if we can focus on education and if we can focus on skilling in new tech, the opportunities are plenty. Why does Make in India have to be in physical manufacturing? Why can't it be in the virtual world?
Okay.
You're doing pretty well there.
We'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much to all our panelists for your very energetic contributions. Thank you very much. And just to those who are watching elsewhere, let me just say that you can continue the discussion on Fair Observer. You can sign up for our newsletter, you can subscribe to our channel, follow us on social media, and you can also publish with us. So do please join us and become a Fair Observer. Thank you very much to you all.